afterward. There's YouTube videos of him talking about his philosophy. Logotherapy, or meaning therapy, is what he calls it. And what you try to do is basically have a sense of purpose, a narrative that you believe is the reason for your living. Talks about one Jewish woman who had a bracelet of teeth, and when he asked her what the teeth were, she said they were a tooth from each of the children that she had that had died during the Holocaust. And how have you managed, since you lost all your children? It turned out she ran a foster care program for lots of other children that were also parentless. And she got her meaning from taking care of those children. So the idea, of course, is that if you have a reason for living, and if you think about the military people in foxholes, right? I remember in one of the movies, Schlachtfest, what's the name of it? Slaughterhouse. Schlachthaus 5. So 5. That's a book by Kurt Vonnegut, also made into a movie about a man which is probably actually autobiographical of Kurt Vonnegut, was in the war and was in a German prisoner of war camp in Dresden. And while there, the Dresden bombing occurred, but all the prisoners were down in the bunker, and so they survived the bombing of Dresden, but when they came up and saw what had happened to the city, it was completely demolished. So he writes a book about that experience and so on. But the people that are in the foxholes, they feel like they're there fighting for their country, and they have to do everything they can to try to defeat the enemy. So part of the book and where he was captured was in one of the last battles of the war in World War II, and they were surrounded, and the Germans were coming through with tanks and all sorts of things, and the people that had no belief that they were actually fighting evil for the best interest of the community were scared to death and wanted to just run away. But the ones that had belief in what they were doing and were there, they were the ones that stayed in the foxholes and did their best to in the Battle of the Bulge, to keep the Germans from winning. And they actually succeeded, in defending the Germans at that point. And that was the end for the Germans in the Eastern Front, right? So, interesting book, and the idea, of course, the importance of that logo, the meaning in your life. But also, Viktor Frankl does something very stoical in surviving, because he describes how, as the Nazis were beating people and overworking them and starving them, that he survived because his mind literally enabled him to withdraw from the physical violence that was occurring to his body. So he was watching himself being treated that way and not actually one with it. And he was convinced as a psychiatrist that the people that gave in to what the Nazis were saying and telling them and so on, and believed it, that was the end of their life. Within a week or two, they would have died. But because he was instead just like intellectually curious about how things were going and so on, he was somewhat safe from this experience. I remember, not necessarily thinking about this, but remember I got my master's degree in philosophy and then decided to join the army. I was pretty old, at the time. There was only one other person in my company, my training company, that was older than I was. But in any case, my big worry, of course, was would I survive basic training? If I got through basic training, I thought, okay, I'll be in a language school, should be great. As it turned out, I could see exactly the kinds of things that Viktor Frankl is talking about. When the drill sergeant is standing in front of your face and saying, "You're lower than whale shit at the bottom of the ocean, recruit," you're trying to destroy who you are, right? And the goal was to destroy who you were and then build you back up as a person, as part of the green machine, a team. And so literally, they're trying to scare the crap out of you, and it worked with a lot of people. I remember, the one, he was an adult, but he was still young, and he was literally crying. He was like, "I want to go home to my mommy." And they sent him home. But basically, if you survive that, and my problem was, as I was watching what was happening, I had this kind of mental withdrawal in my mind that enabled me to be fine with it, and I knew, okay, I have to act the part, so when the drill sergeant would say, "Are you a rabbit?" "Yes, drill sergeant," whatever, you just answer, and do the push-ups, and you do, and you act the role, and you mentally are isolated from what's going on. So that's a Stoic way of behaving in that situation, so that you're safe from what's going on to you. You might even think of, if you're driving down the Glen Highway and some person, I almost call them an explicative, but as they're driving by, they zoom and cut you off and all that sort of thing, and your gut reaction, of course, if you're healthy, is kind of the squirting of the testosterone that says, "Kill him," that kind of thing. But you control yourself by withdrawing from that emotional situation and say, well, the most important thing is arriving safely, and that person will probably be in a ditch in a few hundred more feet or so. Don't worry about them, ignore them, that kind of thing. A very stoical kind of reaction to that kind of thing. So Stoics, they're the philosophy of the empire. The Epictetus himself was a slave. Which one am I in here? This is Epicurus, I think. There. So here's Epictetus. He himself was a Greek slave owned by the Romans, and in fact was one of the slaves in the council of Nero, the educated ones. So he was able to train people. Not all slaves were sweeping and cooking pigs and things. A lot of them were very educated, as he was. And so he was teaching people and so on, and probably advising people on Nero's council. And yet at the same time, you can imagine him sitting there while all kinds of crazy things are going on. Nero playing the harp while Rome was burning. Who knows, what their actual situation was. And yet running the society, despite the lack of intelligence on the top, the bureaucracy ran the city in quite an amazing fashion. So the Stoics, the philosophy of empire, and when we talk about the Nazis, for example, and we talk about the Nazis that were in the bureaucracy, one of the more famous of them was Eichmann. Eichmann was the one that Hannah Arendt Eichmann in Jerusalem. Eichmann was captured by the Israeli spies and brought back to Israel, put on trial in Jerusalem for his role in the Holocaust, where he was the bureaucratic head of the Holocaust. He was the one that arranged the schedules for the trains and so on to take the Jewish people to the various camps and so on. And so this was a trial where he was in fact found guilty and executed, but Hannah Arendt, in writing about him as a reporter for the New York Times in the United States, reported that he is an example of a banal a bureaucrat. You know, he wasn't evil, he was just doing his job. It just so happened his job was making sure that the Holocaust ran smoothly. He was really not an evil person, he was just a bureaucrat. You know, the banality of evil, that's just, you need what banality might mean, have a look. By the way, it's kind of interesting to me that Hannah Arendt, who was Jewish herself, and a student of Martin Heidegger in Germany, before she came to the United States to flee. She first went to Paris and then to the United States to get away from Hitler, married an academic here in the United States whose name was Professor Blücher. Well, when she wrote this story about Eichmann and the idea that he wasn't really evil, he was just doing his job, the Jewish community in the United States was furious with her. They wanted him to be viewed as evil, a Voldemort kind of person, right? And they were really very angry and threatening to Hannah Arendt for what she said. And years later, there was a movie made called Young Frankenstein. Young Frankenstein, anybody familiar with it? Yes? Well, there's a scene in it where, actually I should do this. If you remember, Frau Blücher.
You can't see how bad things have gotten. Biden and Kamala took America down.
Frau Blücher is one of the assistants at the castle. This is a comedy.
What knockers?
Oh, thank you, Doctor.
Oh, that's all right.
That was funny. The knockers were.
I am Frau Blücher.
Steady! How do you do? I am Dr. Frankenstein. This is my assistant, Inga. May I present Frau Blücher? And what's got into them?
Your wounds have been prepared, Herr Doctor. If you will follow me.
Igor, would you bring the bags as soon as you're finished, please?
Yes, Master.
After you, Frau Blücher.
Okay, I won't play the whole rest of this cuts, but you get it every single time her name is mentioned. The horses, even when they're off in the distance, they all neigh throughout the movie. It's just an ongoing prank, right? And the question, of course, is, was Mel Brooks, who's the producer of the movie, making fun of Frau Blucher, who was Hannah Arendt. And of course he denies it completely, and of course I completely believe that he was. You know, so that's just a fun little tidbit there. However, okay.